Born to Annoy, A Dawning of Awareness, Chapter 13. Life Takes Another Twist. The summer holidays of 1959 were glorious. The weather was brilliant. I had good friends, and the trials and tribulations of school life and the problems arising as a result of my frequent escapes from it were ended for the duration. I didn't like deceiving my aunts, and I now had a respite from having to do so. In those days, the layout of Marple could be likened to the shape of a fan. Travelling from Rosehill, the land ascended at first slowly and then more steeply up to Oak Green and the road over Marple Ridge, which eventually took you to Disley and Lyme Park. And the further you travelled from Rosehill, so the village became wider, its furthest border to the east being terminated by the River Goyt, where it flowed between Marple itself and the much smaller village of Marple Bridge, before sweeping in a great curve to travel westward along the northern edge of the village. Again, travelling from Rosehill by the main road after crossing the railway and passing the Bowling Green pub on the right, one came to one of the village's principal road junctions. The road to Marple Station and Marple Bridge struck off uphill at an angle to the left by the Jolly Sailor. Unfortunately, the pub has now disappeared. The road into the centre of the village, now lined with shops, climbed straight ahead, and Church Lane climbed increasingly steeply at an angle to the right, eventually passing the Ring o' Bells pub and hence upwards to Oak Green. Thus the three roads mirrored the roughly fan shape of the village itself. About 100 yards up this latter road, Ibbot Lane struck off to the right, passing the Willows Secondary Modern and the Willows Housing Estate, before crossing the canal and continuing to the A6 at High Lane, halfway between Disley and Hazel Grove. If you stuck to Stockport Road into the village centre, it eventually levelled out and you came to a crossroads, the right hand of which was Market Street, blessed with two pubs, the Bull's Head, and at the junction with Ibbot Lane, the Pineapple. The extension of this road to the left terminated at a junction with the road to Marple Bridge, thus completing a triangle. Carrying on up Stockport Road, the entrance to the Municipal Park and the Regent Cinema lay to the left, and the Navigation Hotel on the right. Immediately after, the road narrowed and the right-hand pavement disappeared as it crossed a bridge, taking the highway across the canal. An impressive flight of locks formed a staircase on the right to take the canal up the steep hill towards Marple Ridge. On the left-hand side, the canal formed a wide basin, enabling narrow boats to queue in some numbers, whilst awaiting their turn to navigate the locks. Immediately after, once over the canal bridge, the Art Cafe stood, a favourite meeting place for the local teenagers on Saturdays and Sundays. Here Stockport Road curved right, heading for Strides and New Mills. A narrower road carried straight on past the cafe until it met a further road which thus bounded a considerable triangle of green, the apex of which was the latter road's junction with Stockport Road. This patch of open land was blessed with a small children's playground for use during the day, and a shelter to be put to good use by amorous teenagers after dark, particularly if all the shelters spread about the large municipal park were already full of young and lustful lovers. At this particular part of Marple Village, the canal running roughly north to south was the highest point, the land beyond it to the east and north descending into the valley of the Goyt. Continuing east past the Art Cafe, a rough but wide track continued over the road I have already mentioned, bounding the green. This descended through woodland to the ruins of Samuel Old Nose Mill and the river. After crossing the latter by an old stone bridge, one came to the Roman Lakes, a large flooded area, originally developed to supply water for the steam engines of the mill, and now a favourite spot for angling, boating and walking. This then was the large village beginning to grow into a small town, in which I lived and enjoyed my free time to the full. It presented a sharp contrast to the miserable hours I spent and wasted at school. John Townsend's school days ended that summer at the age of 15, and he began full-time work on the farm. Nigel Crossley, whose birthday was later in the year, still had another year to complete, and so did I, although unlike Nigel, I had already reached the age of 15. I suppose I could have dropped out of life for Tyke County Grammar and settled for an unskilled job. There was no shortage of work, and to me it was an increasingly attractive proposition. The school leaving age was 15, but I knew that my aunts wouldn't stand for it, and there was a limit to my naturally rebellious spirit when faced with their united opposition. Thus I stood at a T-junction in my life once again. I thought I knew the road I should take, a road to employment, albeit unskilled. The other road, which my aunts remained convinced would lead to skilled work and future happiness, I now believe could only lead to their disappointment, and another wasted year for me, for along that road lay the towering hurdles of all levels, hurdles that I was now convinced would surely trip me up. Thus the T-junction was a cleft stick, and it seemed I could end up a loser, whichever route I took. Faced with this seemingly insolvable dilemma, I knuckled down to enjoy my summer break. By this time I often worked on the farm, according to the demands of the season, potato picking and hay-making being the principal back-breaking occupations, although I often brought the cows in for milking and mucked out the shippons. When it came to hay-making and gathering in the bales, being the runt of the litter had its advantages. I got to drive the tractor. Work on the farm also brought in cash to supplement my pocket money and my wages from a paper round. Along with John and Nigel, longer cycling rides were undertaken. Fixed gear bikes are at their best on a cycling track and in flat or gently undulating terrain, but it was impossible to leave or enter Marple without being faced with fairly steep climbs, as it was surrounded by river valleys. The actual gear used, whether it be high or low, is determined by the ratio between the number of teeth on the sprocket on the rear wheel and the number on the chainring. The more teeth on the chainring, the higher the gear. The greater the number on the sprocket, the lower the gear. In hilly country, you needed a careful balance. On the one hand, a gear low enough to cope with the steepest gradient uphill was required, and yet it had to be high enough to ensure you could spin your feet fast enough to keep up with the revolutions of the pedals when speeding downhill. At the same time, you had to strap your feet onto the pedals through the medium of toe clips and straps. If you didn't, you would find your foot flying off and the pedal coming round and hitting the back of your ankle with great force. I tended to use gears on the high side. This enabled me to pedal furiously downhill, picking up maximum speed, and then to launch an attack on the hill to keep my pedalling momentum going. I had a simple rule: no matter how much it hurts, don't stop until the top. As a result, I have always pushed gears higher than I should, a weakness I still suffer from today, although I've now been using gears for a long time. On Friday night, we usually ended up at the cinema, and Saturday afternoons at the art cafe. We listened to the top 10 on the cafe's radio, chatted up the girls, and tried to convince them it would be worth their while to accompany us to the park, or down to the Roman Lakes, or to the cinema the following Friday, or all three options. Rock and roll formed the background to our lives, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, and Fats Domino being my clear favourites. Alas, time passes, and my final year at school commenced in the autumn of that year. The first day back didn't seem any different than had gone before, at least not until the first lesson after dinner. 46 teenagers, rebels with a cause, took their places in their normal boisterous ways, messing about as usual, awaiting the arrival of the math teacher. A stranger entered the room, medium height, steel grey hair, broad-shouldered. He placed a bum cheek on the front of his desk, one leg dangling, regarding us. The hush replaced the chatter. "Good afternoon, lads. My name's Robinson." 46 pairs of eyes focused on him, wondering where our expected master was. "I've been told not a single one of you is capable of learning anything," he informed us. Silence reigned. He regarded us once more, and finally said, "However, I do not believe what I have been told. I have never met a person yet, young or old, who is not capable of learning, and I am determined you will all pass your O-level in mathematics this year. Is there any one of you who disagrees?" A long pause and a long silence. "Right, I will take that as your agreement with my position. Let's begin. We have much to do and little time to do it in." He turned to the board, hesitated, and turned back to the class. "There is something you should be aware of. If there is something you do not understand, I want you to ask for clarification. If you feel you need more help, then ask for help. I am willing to provide additional assistance to any individual or group at break times and after school, providing you genuinely require and want my assistance." Mr. Robinson was a remarkable man, and turned us all around. I'm not sure how many eventually completed that year with an O-level in mathematics. I was one of them, and I'm sure the overwhelming majority, if not all, did their very best. I certainly can't think of a single lad who had anything but respect for him. In my case, it also galvanized my attention to other subjects. Engineering apprenticeships took 3 forms in those days. A trade apprenticeship often commenced at the age of 15, at the end of which, on attaining the age of 21, the worker would have the status of a skilled shop floor worker. As part of such an apprenticeship, the apprentice will be expected to attend night school. The second type, a school apprenticeship, intended to produce skilled white-collar workers, draftsmen and other technical staff, involves shop floor experience and attendance at college 1 day a week. An O-level in mathematics, at least one science subject, and English language were the absolute minimum to be considered for acceptance. Then there were university apprenticeships, usually to equip the student for managerial and leading design and technical roles. By the time we took our mock exams, I was feeling a lot more confident. I had a natural bent for English, and I knew I could do well in mathematics, an understanding of which was important to achieving a positive result in physics. With a good result in engineering drawing, I should be okay. However, shortly before these mock examinations, I suffered an accident. I decided one evening to clean and oil my bike. In order to oil the chain, I turned the machine upside down, balancing it on the saddle and handlebars, and carefully completed the lubrication. I then gave the cranks a fast spin and sat back to watch the behaviour of the chain as the back wheel revolved at great speed. Naturally, this being a fixed wheel, the cranks also rotated. I then committed a major error. Instead of lightly placing my hand on the tyre to slow the momentum of the wheel, I tried to grab the crank. My hand slipped and my middle finger found itself between the chain and the chain wheel. The momentum of the wheel carried the chain on its inevitable course, and the end of my finger shot into the air at great speed, landing I know not where. I looked at my bleeding digit. There was a lot of blood, but much to my surprise, no pain. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the cold tap. Then the pain came. Intense, teeth-gritting, eye-watering, searing pain. The blood disappeared and broken bone appeared, protruding from severed flesh. Almost as speedily, Auntie Dolly appeared on the scene, attracted by my cries. "Quick, into the car, you're going to hospital." They took skin off the inside of my lower left arm and grafted it over the wound. Luckily, it was my left hand. It wouldn't affect my ability to write, to calculate, or my ability to draw. Well, not quite. When the time arrived for the mock exam in engineering drawing, I was back at the hospital having my stitches taken out. My engineering drawing teacher was my form master, the very same I had fallen out with so early in my career at Hyde County Grammar. He knew I was on top of the subject, but he wouldn't let me take my O-level out of sheer vindictiveness. Despite this setback, in the end I'd done well enough in the mock exams to sit the real thing in art, English language, English literature, physics, chemistry, and mathematics. Ironically, I failed English literature, probably my strongest subject, but passed the rest. Dolly and Beatty were pleased as punch when the results finally arrived, and I felt benumbed, not believing my luck. Thank you, Mr. Robinson, wherever you are. You are a real star. In the September, I would start employment as a school apprentice at the Ferguson Paling factory of Associated Electrical Industries, Switchgear Division, Higher Openshaw, Manchester 11, with an understanding that if I completed both my apprenticeship and my studies for an ordinary national certificate in mechanical engineering satisfactorily, I would emerge as a junior draftsman at the age of 21, with the prospect of becoming a senior draftsman and thus to achieve full wages, or rather salary, at the age of 30. It also meant I would be reunited with my dad. He now lived in Gorton, not far from Cross Street, where Beattie had her shop. I would live with him during the week, returning to Marple at the weekend. During those last summer holidays, my aunts had a visitor. I hadn't been in the bungalow long. Beattie had gone to Manchester that day, and Dolly was at work. The doorbell rang, and when I answered the summons, a tall, broad-shouldered black man stood on the step. "Is Miss Beatrice in?" he asked. I informed him neither of my aunts were at home, explained I was expecting them within the hour, and invited him into the house. He said it was probably better if he returned later. I asked him his name. He told me it was Bill, and both Dolly and Beattie knew him. Beattie and Dolly returned together, Beattie with a big grin on her face. "Make a brew, Malc, Beattie's celebrating," Auntie Dolly informed me. I informed them they'd had a visitor, and he'd be back later. As soon as they'd worked out Bill wasn't their brother, Beattie smiled. A double celebration. I hope he's not in trouble. It turned out Beattie had become frustrated with retirement and applied for a job at the new C&A store in Manchester. She was now 59, but had lied about her age and managed to get away with it. Bill duly turned up, and we eventually all sat down together. He'd fallen on hard times and lost his job as a car mechanic. It turned out he had a chance of another, and felt if Beattie gave him a reference, it could clinch it. "Of course we will," Beattie told him. "We'll never be able to repay you for looking after Norman." This reference to Dad intrigued me, but I waited for Bill to leave before asking the obvious question. It turned out Bill had left Jamaica at the onset of the war to help defend the mother country. He'd met my dad when they both travelled in the same compartment from Manchester Central Station to start their basic training in airborne supply. They struck up a conversation and swapped life stories. Subsequently they became firm friends. As I've already stated, Dad had been a sickly child. He was small of stature, about 5'2", and far from streetwise. Bill was 6 foot tall and very streetwise, having worked for a brief period in New York. Beattie explained that Bill had virtually taken Dad under his wing and got him through the war without mishap. She also told me they'd offered Bill financial help to set up his own business as a mechanic, but Bill had refused. "Stupid pride," Beattie told me. "He's a hard worker and highly skilled, but he'd rather starve than take our money." I wondered why a highly skilled worker couldn't obtain steady work, and asked. "Bill's black," Dolly said, "and this country's full of ignorant racists."